Okay, so let me take you through the journey. So, blockchain. Why blockchain? It's basically the evolution of trust. That is the real foundation. Why we need blockchain? Why blockchain is relevant to the world? Why blockchain can be stopped? Blockchain not as a technology innovation, but the game changer of the way the business and social system around us going through the transformation, natural transformation, not a forced one, right? Nothing can stop. As a blockchain, as a technology, it may be, you may argue blockchain, chaining of the blocks and all these things. I'm not even talking about it. We are using the word blockchain because it is popular. Otherwise, the real concept here is the distributed ledgering and distributed computing. Most people will stop at distributed ledger when it comes to blockchain. I would see blockchain, the distributed ledger is only one leg of the tripod. The other two I will be introducing, as the presentation goes. Um, so the blockchain foundation for blockchain, why blockchain is relevant to the current world. It you can only understand if you understand the evolution of trust. Okay, that's what we are going to be seeing right now. I'm going to
So
mute.
one second, sir.
I'm
Guys,
going to
please mute. Please mute.
I'm going to mute all, and then I think let's see. Hmm, unmute. Okay, I think everybody's mute now. That's good. Let's continue. So the trust, evolution of trust is real foundation for blockchain's relevance to the current and future world. If you see the time, thousands of years, we were agrarians. So during the agrarian time, when there is the the trust or the bearer of contract, bearer of trust as a guarantor of the trust between two parties, two people getting into some kind of a dispute or some kind of a transaction between one another, right? Imagine a village 2000 years ago. Imagine a village, or even before that, right? A village. Who would be doing the that's agrarian? Everybody does some kind of agriculture, and then keep exchanging the food grains, and whatever they grow they sell to other people, and then whatever the other people grow they buy, right? It's the exchange of the agriculture products. That was the agrarian time, right? The any time when there is a transaction, there has to be somebody who would do the um, bearer, basically the guarantor for two parties to do the transaction. That's how the trust starts. People don't trust each other easily, but they trust a middleman. They always wanted somebody as a middleman who they can trust, right? So agrarian time, the guarantor was a chief or a head, or the king, right? Of if it is within the village, the tribal, if it is the village head, will be the guarantor. On his supervision, things will happen. And or the king, if it is a larger transaction, probably the king would be the guarantor, right? Or the trust bearer. So two people do the transaction, trusting the king would interfere later if there is a dispute. So what kind of a trust would that be back in those days? When I talk about trust, I talk trust into. I want you guys to imagine trust in two categories. One is the commitment, because you can't really do. The trust is there are two components of the trust: commitment and the mediator to who you believe. Right? What are you committing as a part of the trust, and who is going to be the mediator when something goes wrong? Right? These are the two components of trust. So in agrarian time, the oral commitment, right? People believed or relied on oral commitment between each other, right? In the who would be the mediator? The community is the mediator, and personal mediation. Basically, the village head would be the village supervisor or head, would be the mediator between the parties. And then the commitment is always oral commitment, mostly. Imagine, even if they try to write it down somewhere, mostly it is oral commitment. Um, Collective memory, or basically, or the ledger, where somebody has to remember things, right, about the incident, about the background of that particular transaction, because over years the background of the transaction would be forgotten. So somebody has to remember that what happened back then. Somebody is giving a oral commitment. Two parties. One party is selling part of his land to other guy, and during that transaction, the guy says, "Okay, I'm selling half of the land to you, and then for this price. But if you want to buy the second half, you would be paying twice the value. I'm doing a favor by selling at half price now, half of the land, and in the future, if you want to buy the second half, you have to pay me the double." Right? If this is the transaction, and between two parties, um, the somebody has to remember the background of what they discussed, right? And that can go even beyond that. Why he agreed to half anyway, right? That should be some story behind it. He agreed to do half because of some commitment from his father to the other guy's father. His father and other guy's father had some kind of a relationship, and they got into some kind of an agreement. Oh, this land, anytime it was sold, I will be giving you the half price. So it goes one generation, and somebody has to remember that transaction as well. The transaction, the parent of the transaction, correct? So it can go deeper, much deeper. If it still is a case in many underdeveloped nations, right? um, Unfortunately, but that's the way it works, right? So the chief's memory, the village head's memory, actually everybody relies on that, right? As a ledger. Somebody keep storing the transaction, his transaction, his father's transaction, everything. He remembers it. Or when the village head retires, he would transfer all the knowledge of what happened in the past within the village. He will transfer that memory among his sons, or somebody who would be responsible for that. That he is the ledger. He is the ledger. Now the next aspect is issuer, right? And then who is going to be issuing the transactions, tokenized transaction, right? This transaction happened. Hey, this is the final approval. This transaction has happened between two parties. That's also chief of the village. So what is then token for money? So what happens as a part of the transaction? What you get, what you transfer out of the transaction? So this guy's selling half of his land to the other guy. What he's going to get in return? So probably he's going to get a precious metal, gold, or ornaments, or food grain. right? That's all during the agrarian time, used as money for transaction, right? They did not have printed money. They did not have elastic money or fiat currency. It just only what they could able to see as an asset, which get transferred, right? Then pre-industrial age, say few hundred years, now 500 years ago, right? There, the trust and the guarantee moved from the village head or the headman or the king to a central authority created by the king or created by the community. It's called central authority, right? So central authority would be the trust bearer or the guarantor. Then what is a trust? The commitment. The commitment is centralized paper. Paper was invented. So pre-industrial, but still paper existed, right? Paper is the centralized commitment. You put whatever you put, whatever you decide, discuss. You don't put in some village head's memory, but write it down in the paper. Then mediation is government or representational groups. Group heads come together for the mediation purpose. So in their in front of them only the transaction happens, and they approve that. Later if there is a dispute, they are the one who does the mediation. And the collective memory or the ledger, who is doing the ledger or collective memory? Who is going to do that? So the collective memory, we got advanced, not at in the industrial age, but you created a kind of a ledger because you invented the paper. So you create a kind of a paper-based tallying system where you write down all the collective memory, the transactions. Oops, this happened this day, this happened this day. Say, imagine um, in the village head saw paper being invented, then he gets an idea. Oh, let me write down all the things, whatever in my memory for every village, every family in the villages. Let me write it down, the whole history of what happened, right? That is and then create a tallying system. The issuer is a central authority, and the token of money is again precious metals, because and then kind of coins were invented out of the precious metal, right? So this is the time when transactions were happening through the coins, gold, silver, copper. The value of the coin itself is equal to the actual asset value, the transaction value. Then the industrial age came, where we started more industrial production. So in the industrial age, the commitment went from basically the trust bearers. Now banks become the trust bearers, or the state. State means again the government, right? And the banks would become the guarantors or the trust bearers. What would be the trust? Decentralized paper means the papers where the commitment were decentralized papers. Basically, you don't keep the papers in one place, but decentralize, spread them into different places. That's decentralized paper. And who are the mediators? The government, the representational groups, and the library manager. So you are decentralizing the papers. You create parts and pieces of the transactions, or duplicate all this ledger and then keep it in different places. And then there should be a custodian of that library, right? That person becomes a mediator. So any dispute happens, then you go to the librarian, and then the custodian of that and the document, and then he goes and finds the transaction and comes, says that okay, this was agreed upon, this was the deal, right, back then what is the collective memory? Basically the ledger. The ledger be the paper register. You write it in the big register. Again, could be a custodian, could be the king or the state, head of the state, or it could be kind of a balance sheet. within the corporation. If we are dealing with the companies, and it's kind of a balance sheet, it was every year's balance sheet, the transactions were written. Even personal balance sheets, right, started coming up. Then the banks would become the issuer, not the central authority anymore. The bank issues things, and then the token of money is kind of a fiat money. Non-precious coins started coming into existence, because people started inventing, the commodity to money, to money to commodity. That is the economics, right? In order to move the goods from one person to the other person, money was invented as a mediator to finish the transaction faster, nicer, smoother, right? Unfortunately, the money got out of hand, where we started, even now we are only exchanging money to money transaction, and goods were not moved. Most cases goods were not even moved, money were transacting, keep on transacting the money, and keep ballooning the money. So basically, most of the unfortunate, most of you would not want to hear this, but unfortunately, the transactions now worldwide is just because the dollar to other currency equation. If rupee is equal to Indian rupee is equal to dollar value, most of you will lose job, unfortunately, in India, right? It's unfortunate. That's the way it works. You can claim whatever you want. So because most of the services industry, they are not moving the tangible goods, they are moving intangibles, and and make everything as a commodity, a cheaper commodity, and then price only matters. And then the difference in the economics, the currency actually puts everything, throws everything out of the equation. And that's what they're trading the currency. The glorified IT companies are trading currencies. The glorified export import companies are trading currency. China is trading currency. China is not trading goods, they're trading the currency. So they keep devaluing the yen as sorry, not the yen, the Chinese money to as much possible micro level, without adding to the inflation. They keep dividing it, right? That's how then they move the goods as a part of the transaction. At least China is producing commodities and goods which is dumped. Many cases they dump the products, although you can call it as a transaction, but just because they produce, they just simply dump it on the other countries. That's the unfortunate situation, right? So the industrial age, that's the thing. And then the 21st century, is about the central banks and commercial banks started getting into the becoming trust bearers and guarantors. And then the trust is decentralized computer. Computers started coming into the coming into existence. So the computer took over, and then centralized papers plus the paper, all the different types of transactions, as a trust, been introduced. Um, guys, you need to mute yourself. Let me see who is that. Guys, can you check your microphone, whoever it is? Please check your microphone and mute yourself. Okay, thank you. We are going to be disconnected in another couple of minutes. We'll be joining back. Okay. Until then, I'll continue. So the decentralized computers and then the centralized computer were both existing in the 70s and the 80s, right? Then the trust was kept in the computer, and the mediators were governments, and the centralized computer servers or the server manager become the mediator. Basically, you get stuck or some transaction dispute happens, you go and see it is in the computer, and who is the custodian of the computer? It is the server manager who is a custodian, right? That's the that was the trust. The collective memory is the independent electronic ledgers. First time, because of the invention of computers, the electronic ledger started popping up. So you put it in the computer, you know, and store it. Then the issuers were central banks. Basically, central banking system started taking over via the commercial banks. Basically, RBI, the Federal Reserve, kind of central banks took over the control of money, right? And then individual token for money could be fiat currency plus some kind of a digital money like credit cards and all, right? Not the digital money what we are right now seeing, but credit cards started popping up in the 90s itself, right? Then the future now